Gupta. So last day I couldn't complete everything, so I'll just continue with what was left. Let me come over to the slides. I'll just recap whatever I explained in the last session. Just a refreshing kind of thing. So basically today we will be covering services, forms, component interaction, and routing, and I'll do a recap on directives, pipes, observables, and.
Can you please share screen on?
Idea?
Sorry. I'm able to see it actually. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, so I'll continue with services, forms, component interaction, and routing, and I will give a brief on directives, pipes, and observables. So directives, I'll just go through the slides. I'm not going through the code at this time. Directives just adds behavior to a UI element, and it can also extends HTML vocabulary. Directives can be of three types: attribute directives, structural directives, and components. Attribute directives and structural directives are the ones which adds behavior to a UI element, and component is the one which extends HTML vocabulary. By that I mean, see, when you write your components in the HTML, so you specify some. Yeah. So this app menu is a component, right? But in the browser doesn't itself understand this app menu. It understands this div tag, but it doesn't understand app menu. So to make it understand, Angular helps us. So that is how components extends the HTML vocabulary. The ones that is not understood by the browser itself, we make it understandable through Angular. Attribute directives key points. Attribute directives, they don't interfere with the existence of its host element. They just add new functionality to its host element. Structural directives display or remove, structural directives, few examples here: ngIf, ngSwitch, plural, and ngFor. So ngIf just removes or displays a DOM element based on a condition. Same is the case with ngSwitch and plural. Then ngFor repeats over a collection to display a list. Structural directives, it is used for sorry, yeah, I already explained that, so I'll skip. When to use directives, I have these few just general scenarios. I had given a demo on draggable. There are other scenarios like resizable, virtual scrolls by parallax web pages. I have given links on this, so if you want to go to the actual projects and see, you can go directly from these slides. Pipe take in data as input and transforms it to a desired output. These are few pipes and how you can use them. Okay, when to use pipes? Pipes would be used for formatting purposes. Like in this cases, you see uppercase. I changed the character case from camel case to uppercase. And you can also use pipe when you want to abstract away some frequently performed tasks. I forgot to explain it the last day, but I will do it today. Observables, as I had explained quite a lot. I took time on that. Took quite a lot of time on that. Observables, they unite all the event sources from where your asynchronous data comes in. That is the basic idea behind observables. Where it can be used in multiplayer games, geo navigation, etc. So I'll today start with services. Before I start, any questions on the previous topics? No? Okay, cool. So services act as data access layer, which usually calls a REST API. It can also have some business logic, and it can act as a medium for interaction between components. Let me explain all of these one by one. So the basic idea is whenever you fetch your data from the API, that you should not do from the components. Components should only be responsible for representing that data in the UI. That's it. Services will fetch the data and it will provide it to the components. The components will represent that data. So that's the role of services. I have written a demo service here. So in this services ng onInit method, if you see, the first implementation is by using a simple promise. This is the service. So a service implementation should have a decorator of injectable. Whatever dependencies you want, you can just explicitly mention it here. In this case, since this service will be communicating to the API, we need the HTTP service.
So why it's not add service? I think it will.
Sorry?
Why is it not add service?
Well, Angular decided to go it that way. You can recommend them. No problem. Any other question? Okay. So yeah, so it uses this HTTP. That's why we need to inject it here. Whatever other dependencies, if we have, we can inject one by one after a comma. So basically, this function, if you concentrate here, what I'm doing is I'm calling a get function on the HTTP object. This get function, I am passing in a URL. As of now, this static URL. I have the JSON file placed in here in the assets directory, contacts.json. So I'm just fetching that. So once I call this line, remember it returns an observable. HTTP.get returns an observable. Then on that observable, I can map over the response and just return the JSON formatted response of it. There are a few other fields too. You might be interested in that, but for now, this JSON is enough. So I am returning this response.json from here, and the overall observable, I am converting it to a promise. You people might already have used promises, so that's why I'm first going with promises. I will repeat again. This one returns an observable. This just converts it to a JSON format, and this line converts the entire observable to a promise. Now, if I come back to the component, then you see I am calling that function get contacts promise, this function, from the component, and I'm just doing a dot then, since this function returns a promise. So I'm doing a dot then, getting the data, and I'm assigning it to a variable called contacts from promise. The entire data gets assigned here, contacts from promise. Let me come to the HTML. Yeah. So you see, I'm just looping over that contacts from promise list, and I'm displaying this contacts. So the first name, last name, email, and phone. Understandable?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the first part. Data consumption using promise converted from observable. So HTTP.get was returning an observable. I converted it to promise, and then I'm showing this list. This is the usual way which you already have done. The other ways will be, like this. So in this case, get contacts I'm calling, and get contacts, if I come over to the service, it will now return just the observable itself. I'm not converting it to toPromise in this case. So this will return the observable. Now, since I'm getting an observable, I'm getting an observable after this call, okay? Now, since I'm getting an observable, I can subscribe on it. Once I subscribe on it, I have this data here, and again, I assign it to a variable, contacts. And in similar terms, I would display it here. Yeah, this is the one. Data consumption using observable, okay? So in here, from contacts, I'm looping over and displaying each and every contact. So this is the third one. The sequence got a bit wrong. I don't know how. Anyways, so this third one is the one that I'm talking about right now. So I'm consuming data from an observable after subscribing to it. Now remember, when I was here in the pipes section, I had said you can use pipes when you need to abstract away frequently performed tasks. So just keep this in mind, and I'm going to explain this. So you see this code here. Every time your service will be returning an observable, you will have to subscribe on it and then assign it to a variable, and then this variable you can map it to the HTML. Correct? So this dot subscribe and assignment to a variable is kind of a repeated task. I can get rid of this by simply doing this one-liner. You see, I'm calling this get contacts in both line 26 and 32. Okay, it's just that after line 26, I'm subscribing, but in here, I'm not subscribing. So this contact dollar still remains an observable. But hello? Okay. So this contacts dollar still remains an observable, but this one is an array. So since get contacts returns an observable, and this remains an observable. Now let me show you how we bind it in the HTML. You see this part. Okay. Concentrate on this one and compare it with this one. Let contact of contacts. There's not much of a difference. There's just this dollar here and this pipe async. Okay. So in this case, this was an array. We were looping over it. Done. In this case, this is an observable, and we don't know when we will get data from this observable. So what we do is we pipe the observable over to the async pipe. So what this async pipe will do is it will automatically subscribe to this observable, and it will return you the data whenever there is data from the observable. Any question?
We can use any of the three ways.
Yeah, we can use any of the three ways. As per the explanations last day, we should be using observables, and since observables have more support in making native applications too, so in native applications you will be having more and more data from different event sources. So the shift is from this regular promises or sync await to observables. So since we are shifting to observables, and these observables have direct support in the HTML section here, so we should be using this one. This is the recommended approach as of now. So the data in all these three tables remain the same. This is just three different approaches. Any questions on services as of now? I have few more points to explain. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
In Angular 1, we have different kinds of service like prototype, factory method. So
Provider, you mean?
Yeah,
Huh.
provider. So
Yeah.
in this also we have like that.
Yeah. I'm coming to. Let me come over the slides.
Again, the data services is a TypeScript file, right?
Yeah. So this is what you're talking about, right? Providers. Okay, I'll just explain it. Okay, so in here, if you see this, I will uncomment this line. Now we have this providers, this provider defined here, okay? I mean declared here, which means, which basically means is for location strategy, whenever I would want this to be injected in my component or in my service, then if I say something like use class this, then it would mean that it overrides this location strategy, and now I will be using hash location strategy. So this kind of gives you a configuration so that in some cases wherein you need to configure your services, like he was talking in AngularJS 1, you could configure your services before you could use it using providers. So the same concept we can use it here too, but using a different technique. Here, whenever we would be requiring this location strategy, it will actually inject hash location strategy. What this is for, let me show you. Oh, it has already changed. If you see in the URL now, localhost 4200, then observables demo, we don't have a hash in between, okay? But if I uncomment this line, and I say instead of the default location strategy, use hash location strategy, then it would surely change to hash. You see? Now there are hashes in between. I'll go over this when you need to this hash location strategy and when you need not, but this is just an example of providers as of now. Okay. One more example I have. This is factory provider. So in this case, there is a frequent requirement that whenever you do an HTTP request, there has to be a token passed on to the server so that the server can validate you whether you are an authorized user or not. But if you directly use this this.http.get, by default it doesn't send any authorization token. Anyways, how would it know that which authorization to take and where from? For that purposes, whenever you do an HTTP request and if you want some authorization token to get passed by it, then you can use something called a factory provider. The implementation here is very much similar to interceptors in Angular 1. Okay. So this one, what it does is, whenever I will require HTTP, I have a custom HTTP here. What this is here is, in this use factory, this use factory is actually a function. Okay. This is an arrow function, and the arrow function will take in 2 arguments, backend and options, and based on that it will return a new HTTP service. So to understand in simpler terms, you are just customizing the default HTTP provided by Angular. Okay.
So in request options, you will be setting the properties of token based.
Yeah, I'm explaining. So this is the custom implementation, right? HTTP is the default one that is provided by Angular, and the HTTP service is your custom implementation. So I'll just open that, and now you can see that I have this constructor here. Inside this constructor, you have local storage get auth token, options this, blah blah blah. The main thing here is request method. So in here, you will be passing in the token every time you do a request. Just a minute. Yeah, this is the actual HTTP implementation from Angular. In this case, if you see, there are so many methods like request, get, post, put, delete. Overall, if you call any of these, indirectly this request function gets called. Now, since you are overriding this HTTP implementation with this HTTP service, you need to implement this request method at least. You can implement the other ones too, this get, post, put, but at least request is needed, since request is the actual method through which all the other HTTP method, HTTP requests are sent across. So in the request method, you get this token. Eventually you will be getting it from the local storage, but for now I have set it as a string here. And finally I'll be calling this super.request. Why it is super? Because I'm actually trying to call the HTTP implementation, this one, since this HTTP service implementation actually extends from HTTP, so I'm basically calling HTTP indirectly after setting in the token. Okay. So let me show you. Yeah, please concentrate here. When I'm trying to load this contacts.json, you see in the request headers, I have this authorization token passed in, since I was passing it from here, the same token. You notice it starts with GUI, same thing here. Okay. So this is just a custom implementation of HTTP, so that whenever you use HTTP, indirectly this request method gets called, and you can customize your request. Here I'm customizing the request by adding an extra token. How I do it? I do it from here in the providers array. When we define the module in the providers array, I have this object, and inside that I have this use factory implementation here. Okay. Any questions on services? Otherwise I'll move on to forms. Okay. So forms in Angular 4 can be of 2 types: template-driven forms or reactive forms, also called model-driven forms. In template-driven forms, these are very much similar to the forms that you have already done in Angular 1, in case you have done so. Okay. So for forms, I don't have any PPT as such because it's all about code. So in here, you see as per the page here, you have two text boxes, name and debit card number. This goes here, name and the debit card number field. Okay. I have this label here and this input box, and this is just for validation purposes. How this validation works and all is just like, suppose I just leave out of this. It says name is required. For debit card number, if I say type anything, it says a debit card must be of 16 digits, not characters, and debit card number is required.
Digits in the name.
That is allowed. Sorry. Please raise a bug.
Can start this one. Can start this one.
Okay, I opened up this one again. I wanted to show you this, an extension called augury. This is basically for debugging purposes. You should know this, and you should get used to this, because if you are developing Angular applications, I mean, if you are developing application in any language, in any framework, you should know how to debug it, right? So for that purposes, augury.
So default from Chrome or is it a default from Chrome or you have a third party?
This is from the Angular team itself. Yeah.
But when we do a tool, I don't see that.
Okay, it's here.
It's an extension. It's extension.
Extension we have.
Yeah, extension it is. I'm sorry, I misunderstood maybe. So yeah, you need to install this extension called augury to be able to debug Angular applications. My screen has froze, so I literally can't do anything. Okay. If you see here, ng control. No. Maybe I myself forgot how to debug it. Okay, it's down here. Concentrate on the properties of underscore control. You have these things called pristine touched value status. Okay, so as of now I have selected the name control, here, and let me scroll again. It freezes so much. Okay. So this is the name control. If you see, I have not touched the control. Underscore touched is false. Pristine is true. Pristine basically means pure. So as of now, I have not touched it. It is pristine, pure. There's no value, and the status is invalid since I have some validators assigned to this text box. The validators, like there should be at least some value. Since there is no value, so it is invalid. Let me enter anything like B. See, the status is valid now. Correct? And if you see, pristine property has changed to false now since I have touched it. But touched property has not changed yet, because touched, it so happens that until and unless you leave from the control, touched property doesn't change. So let me click outside. You see, touched property has changed to true now. So pristine is as soon as you change any value in the any model value, pristine value changes. touched, when you change it and leave out of the control, then touched property changes. Status will be changed based on the validations you have applied on the control. And as of now, there are no errors. Errors is null. So if I remove B, you see, now status is invalid again. You have something in errors, required true. Okay, so this field is required. That's what it says. If I come over to the other one, debit card number. So the same thing goes here too. Since you have two validations here now, if I enter 1, 2, the status is still invalid because it expects 16 digits. Okay, so there are two validations applied on this one. If I enter all 16 digits, then see the status has changed to valid. Okay, cool. So once I fill up values in both the text boxes, then I can click on the submit button and I see the data, name Bharat and card number something something. This is the template-driven forms implementation. In here, I'll just explain through the code a bit. This was the label, the name, and you have the model here, pay.name. This is a mandatory property. You need to specify it if you are using Angular Forms. So don't forget that. And again, this is also necessary. Hash name ng model. This is necessary. The technical details are a bit too much. This is your validation. You had placed this required validation on the name control, so that is why required. In here, you have the error messages. So whenever you have errors on the name field, and you see that under errors there is an object called required, only then you show this name is required message. You remember I had shown in augury there was this object under errors. So that same thing. Now coming to card number. Card number, you have this is the input box. The name property and the template reference variable remains almost the same. I mean, it follows the same pattern. Then you have this required validation and this validate card number validation.
What is that hash we use for?
This
Hash
is
card number.
This is a template reference variable. So whenever you want to pick any DOM element and want to access it in your TS code, then you can specify something like this, hash card number, and then you should be able to access card number in this code using something called view child. Okay, once again here, if there is an error with a property called required, I show this debit card number is required. If the validation on card number of 16 digits doesn't satisfy, then I show this error. The entire button, the submit button remains disabled if the form is not valid. You see there's a not here. So if the payment form is not valid, then the submit button remains disabled. The submit button, yeah, this one. And when you click on the submit button, you show this template form data. Just the alert box that I showed. That's one. In case you missed. Yeah, this one, the alert message. This. Okay. The other one is reactive forms implementation. So the main difference between these two is just that with reactive forms implementation, it is more of a programmatic approach. whereas in template-driven form implementation, it is more of a declarative approach. So it suits better when you have a static form, whose structure doesn't change dynamically much. In that case, you will be using template-driven forms. But if the structure changes too much, then you should be using reactive forms, since it is programmatic and you can fine grain to the lowest level and customize it. So reactive forms will be used whenever you have a very complex situation and you want to customize everything based on a program. I'll just give you an example that will be better. So suppose I have this form builder. In this form builder, I can drag and drop these form fields, right? So I'm building this form dynamically. There is nothing that is static here. I can choose whatever element I need to place on this page, right? So if there is this sort of dynamic behavior, then you should be using reactive forms. In the other cases, you should be using template-driven forms. One more example from Flipkart. You see, I have a list of shoes here, but on the left-hand side, you see this filters. The filters here are types of shoes: running shoes, walking shoes. But if I am browsing through the list of mobiles, then the filter is different. Brand, then RAM, it's different, right? Eventually, both of these must be using forms. I mean, this search part here too. But since this search implementation, I mean, the fields in the form are different in these two cases, then you should be, in this case, you should be using reactive forms. I mean, the same thing can be achieved using template-driven forms as well, but it becomes a bit easier since you have the programmatic control on it. Huh? So the implementation here is almost the same. I won't go much into details here. Any questions on forms? No? Okay. So I'll move on to component interaction. Component interaction. Okay. So since you will be developing a big application and you will be having multiple components in your application, it would be needed that two components of the application communicate between each other. So there will be a parent component and there will be a child component. The parent component will pass some data to the child component, and the child component will in turn invoke some method from the parent component so that it can update its status. Okay. What I mean is,
Can we pass data between modules?
Modules using services. Okay, look at this. This one here, this is basically the UI for this one. It broke a bit, but anyways. There are no messages yet. It will show you the list of messages if I enter anything and hit send message. Okay. So if I come to the code, there are basically, this is the overall thing that you see here. And inside that, I am basically using these two components, display messages and this message component. Okay. Now, to display the messages, I have a list of messages here in the main component itself. So this code that you're seeing right now, component interaction demo, This is the parent component, okay? And it keeps a copy of the list of messages that have been sent. Now I am using this display messages component, and I'm passing those set of messages from this one, and I'm passing it to display messages component. You see, display messages component. In here, to receive that data from the parent component, I must have this one defined here, and I must decorate this as an input. So I'm declaring that this component will accept messages as an input. So the parent component will know, and it can pass the set of messages. Okay. So here, when we are showing this set of messages, I'm just checking whether the messages passed on from the parent component. If there are any messages at all, messages.length is equal to 0. If there are no messages, then I just display no messages yet. If there are messages, I loop over it and I show the set of messages. This is all about display messages. So one thing to remember, the child component must declare what it is going to accept as an input. The other one is the message component. This component will just display the text box, this text box and this button, and it will raise an event to the parent component whenever the user hits on the send message button. Yeah, you see, this is the send message button, and this is the input text box. When you click on the send message button, it calls this method send message. So this send message, eventually what it does is this calls this dot on new message dot emit. So on new message is this output property defined here. Now in this case, this child component is declaring that it is going to give an output to the parent component, and that output can be is this one on new message, and it can emit this valued message using this output binding. Am I clear? Okay, so you see here on the model, on the text box, this one, I have ng model assigned here message. So whenever this changes, the value gets assigned to this message value, message variable I mean, and when I hit on send message, then it gets this message value and it emits this new event. It goes to the parent. Now the parent must be listening to this event. That is done from here. Okay, so this is called an event binding. On new message, what I'm telling is there is a method on this component interaction demo, this parent component, add message, and you should be calling this method whenever this event is raised from the child component. So this one, add message, this one gets called, and since the parent component has this messages array, I just directly push it to the messages array, the new message that I received from the other component. Am I clear, or do I need to explain? Clear? Okay.
And if I keep both the input and output parameters to like how you kept about the ng model, so it works like both input and output parameters.
Yeah. I didn't explain because Harsha had explained.
You can use it for only for the immediate parent, or it will propagate to the next parent.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it is for the immediate parent. It is for the immediate parent. Yes, both input and output. I mean, input binding and output binding. It is for the immediate parent and child. Okay. Now the question arises: what if the parent-child combination is not immediate? So in that case, how will you communicate between the components? These are just basic slides from the same thing. Now, you see this one, one of the component raises an event, this blue one, it sends the data. It goes to something called a store here, and the store in turn will notify all the other components that some data has changed. See, from this one it goes to this and then to the other components. So there's no relation between this one and these two, right? No immediate relationship. But if you want to communicate, then there has to be something called a global message service. What it does is whenever something changes in this component, I will tell the global message service bus that something has changed. And the global message service bus, this will in turn will let all the other components know that something has changed. Okay. So these components need to subscribe to this store, the global message service bus. Until and unless they subscribe, they are not going to get the updates. If they subscribe, only then they will be getting the updates. This is consistent with observables, if you remember. So in observables, whenever you have an observable object, you subscribe to it and then get the data, right? Similarly, the other two components on the left-hand side, they will be subscribing to the global message bus and then only getting the updates. I have a disclaimer written to the top, to the bottom right. So this is actually from Redux. I'm currently working on Redux. So anyways, now as per this implementation, what it does is I enter some message and it gets displayed here. But what now? What if I want to send this message across to something else, to some other component, like this one? This is the parent component. This is the child component. This is another child component, right? Now I'll show you something else wherein you don't find a relationship. So whatever data that you see here is actually rendered in this router outlet. I'll come to this, but just so you know, whenever I change between the routes, you see only this, the part on the right hand side apart from the menu, only that part changes. So that part is this one, router outlet. Okay. Now I have this one toaster here. So this toaster will there's no relation between the components that are hosted under this one and this one, because suppose I am displaying the component demo component here, just for an example. Okay, and suppose I don't have this router outlet for now. I just display this component demo component directly. Then you see this component demo component is a child of this div, and there's no direct relationship between this component and this toaster. Correct? So here, let me comment this one since that is not the actual one. Now, since I have commented that, component interaction, notice top right corner. Nothing happened. I was like, okay. Just a minute. Huh? Yeah, I didn't enable this one. So I'll first show you how it works, then I'll explain the codes. You see, top right corner. So this is how, this child component is somehow sending over the message to the component which doesn't relate to it directly. Okay. So this global message service implementation is a very simple one. It just uses a subject. A subject is nothing much. It's just a combination of an observable and an observer. So as you know, observable will emit some data and observer will consume that data, right? So subject is a combination of both of these, meaning this subject can both emit data and it can receive data as well. Okay. So I have this private property defined here on new message source. This is a subject, and I am converting that to an observable here. And whenever I call this send message function from this one, so whenever the send message button gets hit, I call this function, right? Then I call this global message service bus and I send over the message. This in turn comes here. And what I do is, using this observable, the subject that I had, I am emitting the message. Now, since I am emitting the message, there must be a place wherein I am consuming the message. So this is where it is. I have this toaster component, right? We had it in the app dot. Yeah, you see this toaster component. So I am subscribing to the global message service bus, and whenever there's a message, I am showing that message using the toaster. So since this service bus is global, I can directly manage it to emit some data, and from somewhere else I can subscribe to this global service bus, which is an observable. I can subscribe to it and I can consume the messages sent from that.
What is the toaster variable then? Is declared it as a
This toaster is it's a custom, a library.
No, you just calling the mention, calling the message.
Yeah, so this is a custom library. Okay, so this one I have not implemented it. It's already there somewhere. I just copied. Okay, any questions on component interaction? No? Okay, I'll just repeat. Whenever you want to pass data from parent component to child component, you use an input binding. You want to pass data from child component to parent component, you use output binding. And for any other communication, you use the message service bus, which inherently uses observables. Okay? So almost there. The last thing, routing. Same as in services, I was loading these contacts. In routing, I am showing these contact names, the same list of 5 people. If I click on any of these contacts, I can see the other details: first name, last name, email, and phone. Nothing much on this. Only the part that you need to be careful about is when I click, you see this route will change. As of now, it reads routing demo. When I click on any of this, it says routing demo /contact/1. This one is a dynamic parameter that I'm passing, so that based on this ID, I can retrieve the actual user of which I want to see the details. Am I clear? Okay. So to implement routing, all you need to do is you need to import router module from Angular router. You need to define your set of routes. By the way, everybody knows what routing is, right? Okay, cool. So routes, I need to define the set of routes. In this, each and every object will have a path and a component which I want to load when I navigate to that path. So in this case, when I navigate to home, I'm actually loading home component. When I'm navigating to observables demo, you see observables demo, I am loading observable demo component. Understandable? So once you have this array, you just need to pass it to this one. Router module dot for route and the array of routes. That is it. Okay. Now in your, how would you link it up? So you see in the application, I have these links, right? So you need to have these things so that user can route to that specific page. It's nothing much. You just need to use this router link input binding, and you need to pass on the path for each one of them. The path that you had defined here. Same thing. Any questions up till now? Okay. So in this one, if you see the second last one, routing demo /contact/:id. So this colon ID actually specifies this is a placeholder for a dynamic input. So whenever I move to this routing demo component, I will have something called ID in my route params, which I can consume here. Please see here, this .route.params.subscribe. So again, params here is an observable here. That's why we need to subscribe to it. And on subscription, this method gets called back. This is a callback function, and it receives the set of params. From there, I can read in the ID, which I had specified here, colon ID. So if this is something like any something like number, employee ID, suppose. If this is like this, then while reading from here, you should have the same name. Okay. Once you have that contact ID, I will just filter it out and filter it out from this contacts array, and I'll select the current contact and I'll display it in the UI. So this comes from the JSON that I had, contacts.json. So this is the entire JSON, right? From there, I would filter it out, and I'll show the current contact.
I think there's a doubt.
Good enough. Tell me.
From JP Nagar office.
Yeah.
But they're not saying it.
Is it shy?
Do we have key value configuration setting in Angular 4, like how we do it? C# by passing key, can we get the value? Hey,
like a dictionary.
Naveen, can you hear us?
But that is already there with JavaScript itself. Why is Angular specific?
Guys from JP Nagar, Accion. Anyways,
who's the guy?
JP Nagar. This is the question.
Okay. Audio is disabled. It's not working.
Audio is okay. Maybe they're not able to.
Okay. Anyways, if you are hearing, then what you are talking about, I think, is a map, and the JavaScript objects are already key value pairs, right? So you can think of them as a map. There's nothing specific to Angular in this case. If you are specifically talking about value that you had in Angular 1, then yes, you have those featured in Angular 4 as well. You just need to check out on value providers. So I hope that's helpful.
Was that helpful, Shiva? Sorry? Sorry?
Give him my number.
Okay, I'll. You can contact Bharat later on, okay? I'll give you his contact. That's easier actually. I should sort of that.
Okay, so in routing, as of now, we are passing in this parameter 1. In other cases, if you want to pass multiple parameters too, then you just need to do a slash and specify a placeholder, okay, like say temp or whatever. So you just keep on doing slash, and you can have some other text as well. Oh, I'm writing this. Huh? So these the ones prefixed with colon are placeholders, and these values you can access it in here, in like this. Okay, so you can pass as many parameters as you want. Object, that is through data parameters. Out of scope, sir. See, in this case, path and component you are passing, right? Together with that, you can pass something called data. So that data will be passed.
You pass object that lacks a request parameter. You pass object, I think that will act as a request parameter.
In the request, since in the browser URL you can't have objects, right? So this is how we abstract it out. This data will just directly be received at the component side, and it will be able to access it. It won't show up in the URL. Okay. Any other question?
Yeah. From routing, how to call a component that is there in another module?
Component that is there in another module, that you should not do, because you will be communicating between components via some data, right? You will be passing some data to the other component, to the other module. That will be done through a service. Okay, once the data is there in the service, the data will say update some observable. The observable will in turn notify it to the component, and the component will render it like that. Okay, you can't directly pass it to the component across modules. Understood?
Suppose if I want to see any page, okay, from one module to another module, how we can do the navigation actually. Suppose I have module 1, I have an HTML, okay, a component page. So based on some conditions, I have to go to another module.
That will be a child of the first one. Yeah. So in that case, you see here you have for root, router module dot for root, and I have the set of routes passed in. In the other case, when you have this child module, you will be doing something called for child. Okay, so that's a big topic. I just gave you a hint that you can go do it through for child. Okay. And any other question?
You said about that hash thing, when to use hash.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, I'll come over to the slides. I'll just read it out anyways.
Yes.
So there can be two types of routing strategies: path location strategy and hash location strategy. So you saw in the URL when I showed you that there was a hash. So that is called hash location strategy. The other normal one is called path location strategy. So with a path location strategy, server side rendering is possible, and hence SEO is also possible. SEO, you know?
Yeah. Search engine optimization.
Awesome. Search engine optimization is possible if you do a path location strategy. Search engine optimization is just for, say, some search engines like Google. So Google will identify your page if you do server-side rendering. If you do client-side rendering, Google may not be able to identify your page. The complete data that your page is trying to portray, Google might not be able to identify it properly if you do client-side rendering, which happens when you do hash location strategy. Okay. With
path location, the components will be reloaded, or
components will be reloaded in the
page will be reloaded.
No.
Page
No.
looks like normal hash.
Yeah, it was not reloading, right? I'll show you again. Go back. Yeah, let me just comment this out. See, I'm moving between the pages, and look at the refresh button. It stays the same, right? It doesn't reload. Okay. So server-side with server-side rendering, SEO is possible, and with client-side rendering, SEO is not possible. I mean, it's not that it's not completely possible, but most of the search engines might not support it. Okay, so you need to take care of that. With path location strategy, URL rewrites need to be enabled in the server side, and with hash location strategy, no server side changes is needed. What I mean by this URL rewrite needs to be enabled is, in this case, after this localhost 4200, there's this routing demo, right? But actually, if you see, there's no page called routing demo on the server side, right? Do I no. Okay. So where was I? Yeah. Routing demo. What was I talking about? Sorry, I forgot. Huh?
There is no component
No
called
routing demo in server side.
Okay, I still don't remember. I completely forgot. Sorry. Okay, URL rewrites I was talking about. Yeah, thank you. So you are with this one. This routing demo page is not there actually, right? If you consider when we used to do PHP development or so, then after this localhost 4200, you would have something called page.php, right? And which will mean that page.php file is there in the www directory, correct? So in similar, going by the same terms, this should mean this URL should mean that there is a file called routing demo in the www directory, but there is none. So how it is actually handled is, all the routes should actually go to the index.html file. This one. So there should be a server configuration so that if whatever request I do from the client side, it should eventually go to the index.html page, and it will load all these resources, all the CSS, all the scripts, the Angular script, your custom scripts, whatever. And since index.html loads, and from there Angular will take over. Okay. So that is what I mean by URL rewrites needs to be enabled. All requests should be redirected to index.html. Okay. For path location strategy, browsers need to have HTML5 history API support. If there is no such thing, then it will break. It won't work. So in cases of IE 8 or 9, it will not work. With hash location strategy, since this hash thing has been working since long back, this is supported in all browsers. Okay. Just a brief info that there are some third-party UI libraries that you can use. Something called PrimeNG, then NG Bootstrap. Let me come here. Yeah, this is PrimeNG for you. You have these set of UI already available. You see, a calendar and all. There are many things. Okay, so just go through this, you will get to know a lot. The code is also open source. If you want, you can go through and check the code. So these controls you need not implement, it's already there. Again, you have NG Bootstrap. This also provides a set of UI components you can use in your project. Just for general info, that's it. Any questions? Any questions, anybody?
What is change and detection strategy?
Huh?
Unchange detection strategy.
That is out of scope.
Also syllabus one.
Yeah,
Couldn't get it.
that's a big topic, dude. And it was not covered, so I can explain you later, but not at this time. It's a big topic, huh? Any other question? Okay then, I'm done.
Thank you.